In 2016, G2 Esports came into the LEC, back then the EU LCS, and won the first title straight away in spring. They then upgraded immediately, switching out their bot lane of Emperor and Hybrid for Sven and Mitty, of course, from Origin at the time, and also integrating a second top laner into their roster, Expect namely, who would eventually replace Kikis, who was not content playing in a 6-man roster with a substitute top laner. They won the summer split again with that roster, and then didn't do also great at Worlds, and decided to run it back. In 2017 dominated the league, won both titles, again went to Worlds, again didn't get the results they wanted, and subsequently made their first rebuild, if you will. These 4 splits remind actually of TSM in the same time span, quite honestly. 4 titles rebuilding after the first spring split, dominating the league in those 2 years, and then falling short in Worlds with a promising roster that everybody anticipated to do great things for the region. The only difference being, of course, that TSM didn't win the first split in 2016 spring. For 2018 then, what did G2 do? They upgraded their top and jungle slightly, probably, but they downgraded bot as they were forced to because obviously Sven and Mithy left the team. In 2018 they did okay domestically, not winning any titles. Fnatic was the clear-cut best team in Europe at that time, but G2 would do great at Worlds, had a great run there. Despite that, for 2019 they upgraded bot massively and they dominated. They got themselves caps obviously for the mid lane, and then switched perks down into the bot lane, and got Mickey X as well. So they had a much better bot lane for 2019, dominated the league. We all know this was the most recent G2 Esports that we all knew and loved. And for 2020, they decided to once more run it back after having reached the World's Finals, of course. Dominated the league again. Did a little bit worse overall in at Worlds as well, but still had a great year. So for 2021 they decided to upgrade bot, and this upgrade is of course very questionable now in hindsight, but it could be argued that Reckless was just a better AD carry player than Perkz probably, plus Perkz of course wanted to play mid lane. So they brought Reckless in, big name of course, and they did very underwhelmingly. It's important to not go overboard with the criticism for this year. Of course it's a failure for this roster and for this organization, but it was still a decent enough team. They had great regular season records. They just didn't gel together all too well and couldn't really put up a decent playoffs performance. But it was still a good team for EU standards, just not for G2 Esports standards. So overall, what's the history for G2 Esports? They only run it back with the same rosters after great success and when it clicked in the rosters. So when the people actually believed that this roster could still go on to do meaningful things. G2 Esports always upgrade even if they're successful, if they see an opportunity or a window to do so. And if they decide to upgrade, they have 2 ways of going about that. They either do big changes, meaning multiple roster changes at the same time to change the direction of the team and give it a new identity, or they do single massive signings, just for the example of Reckless, of course, bringing him in, or bringing Caps in 2 years prior, and just changing one player in the team while doing that. And of course they also brought Mickey X in that year, but that's the point in general. They either do a general rebuild or they sign big name players to just upgrade the stats sheet, if you will, in that one position. Also, they crucially haven't imported recently. You'll notice that the last Korean player playing on G2 Esports was Wadid in the bottom lane in 2018, so that was by now 3 years ago. No import history as of recently. So what are they gonna do now? The current roster is probably super expensive for European standards right now. I mean, these 5 guys are all super tenured veterans in Europe, and they've been super successful in their recent careers even, so they better have big paychecks to pay right now. But these 5 players did not gel together at all. They were not as good as the sum of the parts, quite frankly, and therefore it's very, very unlikely that G2 run this roster back. As I said, they only run it back after success. There was no success, and only when it clicked within the roster, which it obviously didn't with these 5 guys. So the question now is, how are they going to change this roster? And as I also just said, there's two ways that G2 go about things. They either change the identity of the team by doing multiple changes, or do single big name signings. For this offseason, I anticipate big changes and a general rebuild. The reason for that being that the roster, of course, is very expensive right now, so the more of these big underperforming names that they can rid themselves of, the better, just in terms of monetary value, of course. And also, doing single name signings is only reasonable to do if you already have a good system that you want to integrate a better player into. And yeah, as I said, these signings upgrade the stats sheet of that one player, the power coming out at one position, but they don't really alter the inner mechanics of the team too much. So what are these changes gonna be? Personally, let's go through the 5 players. Caps, in my opinion, is the least replaceable. He's probably the youngest guy in the team in terms of his career. He's, of course, not a rookie anymore, but he's still probably got many more years to give, and he's not really shown any signs of falling off in his performance, being washed up. Of course, he's not as dominant as he used to be, but I don't think that can be attributed to a decline of his own skill level, and many experts agree on that. So I don't consider him very replaceable. There's not really any other available mids in the league right now, unless you want to go Asian, which probably G2 Esports is not looking to do. Caps is probably gonna stay on this roster. Reckless then, on the other hand, is sort of replaceable. He's not heads above everybody else in the league right now in terms of bot lane performance. You could very much argue that there's comparable skill level AD carries that would probably cost you less money in the league right now. But it doesn't make all too much sense to replace this guy in terms of you're not really gonna get that much more out of any other AD carries. Of course, you could go for more lane dominant, aggressive AD carries with a different playstyle, but I think this only would make sense if you got a duo bot. The only point in replacing Reckless, because the replacement that you're gonna get realistically is not gonna be that much better than Reckless. So if you want to do that, the only point in doing that would be to bring a functioning system into your bottom lane. For example, a bot lane such as Handsama and Trimby, if you wanted that, or Upset and Hylissing, just a well-working two-man duo bot lane. Karzi Kaiser, such a duo could make sense in this case if you wanted to replace Reckless. In the top lane, Wonder really only depends on how much you believe in him. If you believe that this was just one down year in his career, and if you're in the org right now and you see this guy, he's gonna try hard in the offseason, he's gonna bootcamp hard, and he's gonna get his level up to par again, he's gonna look much better in a well-functioning team, then it's very much fine to keep this guy. I don't think top lane is too important in this scenario right here. If you look around in the league, what other top laners there are, you can certainly change the top laner and get a new identity from the top lane, and this is very much something that this team needs, a new identity, a mix-up in chemistry. But it doesn't necessarily have to come from the top lane. In the jungle, Jankos is a very interesting one. On the one hand, skill-wise, I would argue he's one of the best performing players still in the team. He's very much still capable of doing what he always used to do, at least in these recent years, of course. But his future is definitely uncertain. It's not clear how many more years this guy really has left in him. He's always jokes about retiring soon or going to NA or whatever, but you never know how he actually feels about these things. Again, this is obviously something that the people within the team would have a much better idea about, but his future is all but uncertain, so it's not really clear how to go about him. There's definitely an argument for him making a change in the jungle, but the one thing that you need to be very mindful of if you want to change that jungle is don't get baited into signing just any of the junglers right now that are popping off on their mechanical champions. If you're keeping people such as Caps and Reckless, then the most important thing you need from the jungler in this team is stability in the early game and facilitating your very strong carry players. So just getting a mechanical prodigy in there, such as, like, I don't know, Season 5 Rush or whatever, isn't gonna fix this team. I don't think, at least. So Jankos is still very good at reading the map, facilitating for his star players, and juggling the demands of theirs. So in terms of facilitating junglers, I don't see that many other guys in the league that could do his job right now. Just in terms of raw skill level from the jungle, there's definitely alternatives that you could look for. So it's a dicey one with Jankos. You're definitely not going to sign him for 3 or 4 more years, I don't think. And lastly, for support, there's Mickey X down there, and in my opinion, he's very replaceable. As I said already, if you wanted to change your ADC, you better bring in a established duo bot lane, and that would mean Mickey would have to go, sadly for him. But also, just if you wanted to keep Reckless, I don't think the bot lane looked very great together in those duo lanes. I don't think I ever saw great synergy develop between those two, and I don't think any of the experts are great fans of this bottom lane pairing. It did sound nice. People always said that Mickey was very similar to Hylissang in many regards, but definitely on Fnatic, Reckless with Hylissang looked much more comfortable by the end than in this one here with Mickey X. I don't want to put the blame for that on Mickey X or whatever. It doesn't matter. It just didn't really work out, and somebody has to go, in my opinion. So Mickey X, he might have a couple of more years in him, but let's face it, he's already played a number of great years. He's not looked too great this split, but even if you believe he's still a very good player, he's had that hand injury, which, I mean, no knock against him, but who knows if that's gonna come up again. And there's plenty of talented support in Europe right now, which really wasn't the case in past seasons. If you could get a Kaiser maybe, that would be definitely a thought worth considering. So what's the conclusion here right now? What are G2 most likely to do? My opinion, something that came up on one of the talk shows from Thorin, I believe, was somebody suggested just getting Bwipo and Hylissang from Fnatic, and that would be a good fit here. If you switch out Wonder and Mickey X for Bwipo and Hylissang, you would have a bot lane combo that probably would work out much better than your current one, at least in Fnatic. Reckless Hylissang looked very good. You could put Bwipo back in top lane, and that would be a very different style of top laner. Regardless of whether you believe Wonder or Bwipo is the better individual player, they inarguably play very different from each other, and the pairing between Bwipo and Caps sounds very great. If this roster of Bwipo, Jankos, Caps, Reckless, and Hylissang sounds familiar to you, it's 4 of the 5 pieces that made it to Worlds Finals in 2018 with Fnatic. Only Broxah in the jungle is switched out for Jankos, and that sounds like a banger lineup to me. All these players have not fallen off yet in their careers, I don't think at least. And Jankos instead of Broxah in that lineup, that sounds like the dream man. Broxah in that year, of course, was a very talented mechanical player that popped off at Worlds on his Lease, and everybody remembers that. But I don't think that was what this roster needed. They already had enough playmaking from Hylissang and Bwipo. The chemistry between these two guys is unreal, and although they say they prefer playing closer together now with the jungle and support positions, I believe if you put Bwipo back on top and then give them a facilitating jungler like Jankos, that could be a very well functioning lineup. So that would be my favorite lineup, as an outsider at least, for G2 in the next season. Trying to get that Bwipo and Hylissang combo over to them and replicate that 2018 Fnatic magic. Other than that, of course, there's still names you can throw out there. Kaiser, as I mentioned earlier, would be a good support to try out with Reckless. No idea how these two guys feel about each other, but that sounds at least like something you could very much try and go for. In the jungle, if you wanted to get rid of Jankos, of course, as I've done all the time in this video, I'm not really considering imports right now. But for the jungle, I don't know, you could look around in Europe. There's guys such as Razork. I don't think he's ready yet for a big job such as this one, but who knows, if you see something in him that's promising. Again, if you're a rookie jungler, this is probably not a rookie, but a rather new jungler. This is probably a team that you could function in, even if you don't have, if you have still a bit of nerves or not quite used to those big stake matches. But in this team, pretty much anyone could function to some degree. But I really think you'd rather have a veteran in there who could stand his ground against these other star players. And therefore, I don't know, you'd really need to get a big signing there of a veteran player. And I don't think there's anybody just like Jankos on that level right now. Other top lane suggestions? I mean, you could go in a bunch of different directions. Of course, you could try and get Alfari back from NA. He'd be a more lane-oriented solution if you wanted to make Reckless a more passive and more weak side option in the bot lane, which certainly could work out. I mean, playing through top lane on this lineup does sound nice, and if you remember in 2018, G2 would pretty much only play through the solo lanes and wanted perks, and Jankos did very much do a good job with that lineup. So maybe you try to replicate that sort of a style, getting Alfari or something. I would dominate, suggested getting Broken Blade up in the top lane. I don't know. Still, maybe if you believe he's good enough skill-wise, he could do the same thing up there. I don't hate the idea. But you could also go for more of the facilitating top laners such as Whippo. You could even, like, I mean, you might laugh at me for that, but you could even get a guy in there like Impact, like Sunday, like one of these guys, just the super solid tank players, the weak side pressure soakers, these guys. If you wanted to take a more bottom lane oriented approach, that sounds okay as well. But I mean, it's really up to whatever you guys prefer. Top lane is a very flexible role in that regard. And as I said, mid lane, I wouldn't try and change anything at all. I don't think anything better than Caps can come from that, especially with Larson being re-signed to Rogue and Humanoid. Maybe you get Humanoid in there, but I really don't see the upside over Caps for these next couple of years at least in that guy. So I don't think you should do a replacement there. Alright, that wraps it up. I want to give a final disclaimer on this video. People from the inside of the team will always know better than people speculating just like me right now. I mean, it's obvious, of course, but I still want to state it in the end that this is not me trying to teach G2 what to do with the roster. This is just for the fans to get a conversation going, to start speculating about different ways that this group of players could go about their next couple of years in their careers. So, with that said, don't see this as me spitting the gospel here to you all. Just leave a comment down below, get a discussion on Reddit started, what you think about these proposed changes, what you would change up in the roster, and yeah, I'm very much excited to see what G2 officials will do with these guys, and better luck next time in 2022 G2 Esports. For the other EU fans, let's look forward to the World Championships.